My daughter locked herself in the bathroom before the field trip, refusing to come out. Defeated, I let her stay home. 4 hours later, the school called, voice trembling. The entire bus went off the cliff. I couldn't speak. They said, "No survivors." The voice on the phone belonged to Principal Diane Hargrove, and it was shaking so badly I could barely understand her words. "Mrs. Keller, there's been an accident. The 4th grade field trip bus went off Cascade Ridge Road at approximately 11:47 a.m. Emergency services are on scene, but I need you to understand what I'm telling you. There were no survivors. All 23 students and 2 teachers are confirmed deceased." My phone slipped from my hand, clattered against the kitchen counter, and I heard Principal Hargrove's voice continuing to speak from the speaker, distant and tinny, saying something about grief counselors and emergency contact protocols. But I wasn't listening anymore because I was turning to look at my daughter Zoe, my 8-year-old who was sitting at the dining table eating a grilled cheese sandwich, humming a song from her favorite cartoon, completely alive and safe because 4 hours earlier she'd locked herself in the bathroom and refused to come out. I'd been a middle school math teacher for 11 years, long enough to recognize a genuine tantrum versus manufactured drama, and what Zoe had thrown that morning at 6:45 a.m. had been neither. It had been pure terror. She'd woken up screaming, something about the bus and falling and not being able to breathe. And when I tried to calm her down and explain that the field trip to the Natural History Museum was something she'd been excited about for weeks, she'd run to the bathroom and locked the door. I'd stood outside that door for 30 minutes, coaxing, reasoning, eventually threatening to cancel her upcoming birthday party if she didn't come out and get ready for school. She'd just cried harder, her voice muffled through the wood, saying over and over, "I can't go on the bus, Mommy. Something bad is going to happen on the bus. I can see it. Please don't make me go." At 7:20 a.m., I'd given up, called the school office, told them Zoe was sick and wouldn't be attending the field trip, and then spent the next hour trying to coax her out of the bathroom with promises of her favorite breakfast and a day of watching movies together. She'd finally emerged at 8:30 a.m., pale and exhausted, and had been fine ever since. Normal, happy even. Now, standing in my kitchen with my phone on the counter still broadcasting Principal Hargrove's trembling voice, I understood that my daughter had somehow known, had sensed or dreamed or intuited that the bus carrying her classmates and teachers would plunge off a mountain road 4 hours later, killing everyone aboard instantly. I picked up the phone with shaking hands and interrupted whatever Hargrove was saying. "My daughter didn't go," I whispered. "Zoe stayed home. She's alive." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Hargrove's voice came back, different now, sharper. "What do you mean she stayed home? Our attendance records show she was marked absent sick, but her permission slip was signed and submitted. She was supposed to be on that bus." "She had a nightmare," I said, my voice sounding strange and disconnected. "She locked herself in the bathroom this morning and refused to come out. Said something bad was going to happen on the bus. I thought it was just anxiety, so I let her stay home. I called the office before 7:30. Another long pause. Then, "Mrs. Keller, I need you to keep Zoe at home today. Don't bring her to school. Don't talk to any reporters if they contact you. The district is handling all communication about the incident. Do you understand?" The way she said it made something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't the voice of an educator concerned about a traumatized child. This was the voice of an administrator worried about liability. "What happened?" I asked. "How did the bus go off the road?" "The investigation is ongoing," Hargrove said, each word carefully measured. "The state police and the Department of Transportation are examining the scene. We'll have more information once their initial reports are complete. For now, please keep Zoe safe and know that the district is providing grief counseling resources for all families affected by this tragedy." She ended the call before I could ask anything else. I stood there holding my phone, looking at Zoe who was still eating her sandwich, oblivious to the fact that everyone she sat with at lunch, everyone she played with at recess, everyone in her entire 4th grade class was dead. 21 classmates. Mrs. Rebecca Thornhill, who'd taught 4th grade for 16 years. Mr. Alan Cho, the young student teacher who always wore funny ties and made the kids laugh. All gone because a bus had somehow driven off a cliff on a road they traveled multiple times per year for field trips. I'd driven Cascade Ridge Road myself dozens of times. It was the main route from our town of Millbrook to the city where the Natural History Museum was located, a winding mountain highway with stunning views and well-maintained guardrails. Buses used it constantly. School groups, tour companies, commercial transit. In the 15 years I'd lived in this area, I'd never heard of a single accident involving a vehicle going off that road, let alone a school bus full of children. The news coverage started within an hour. Local stations interrupted regular programming with breaking alerts. Mass casualty event in Cascade County. School bus plunges off mountain road. I turned on the television and watched aerial footage from news helicopters showing the crash site, a section of Cascade Ridge Road where the guardrail had been completely destroyed, and far below, barely visible through the trees, the crumpled yellow wreckage of a school bus. The reporter's voice was somber and professional. Authorities confirmed that a Millbrook Elementary School bus carrying 23 students and 2 teachers went off Cascade Ridge Road at approximately 11:47 a.m. this morning. All 25 people aboard are confirmed deceased. The cause of the accident is under investigation. but preliminary reports suggest the bus may have experienced brake failure before crashing through the guardrail and falling nearly 200 feet into the ravine below. Brake failure. The words hung in the air like an accusation. I thought about the old yellow buses I saw every day pulling up to Millbrook Elementary, thought about how I'd noticed rust on some of them, thought about budget meetings I'd attended as a teachers' union representative where transportation maintenance had been listed as deferred spending year after year. I picked up my phone and called my husband Richard, who was at his dental practice across town. He answered on the first ring, his voice already tight with stress. "I just saw the news. Is Zoe okay? Tell me she's okay." "She's fine," I said, my voice cracking. "She's here. She's safe. She didn't go on the field trip." "Thank God," Richard breathed. "Thank God. I was driving over there right now. I thought—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "How did she not go? She was so excited about it." "She locked herself in the bathroom this morning and refused to come out. Said something bad was going to happen on the bus. I thought it was just anxiety. I let her stay home." Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then, "She knew. Our daughter somehow knew that bus was going to crash, and she saved her own life by refusing to get on it." "The school is acting weird," I said. "Principal Hargrove told me not to bring Zoe back, not to talk to reporters, said the district is handling all communication. It felt wrong, Richard, like they're more worried about covering themselves than about what happened to those kids." Over the next 48 hours, the story evolved in ways that made my suspicions seem justified. The state police released their preliminary findings. The bus, a 1998 Thomas-built model that had been in service with Millbrook School District for 19 years, had experienced complete brake system failure approximately 2 miles before the crash site. The driver, a 62-year-old man named Gordon Phelps who'd been driving school buses for 34 years, had attempted emergency braking procedures and even tried using the guardrail to slow the vehicle, but the combination of the steep downgrade and complete brake failure had made the crash inevitable. What the state police report didn't explain was how a school bus could experience total brake failure in the first place, or why that bus had been on the road despite numerous documented safety concerns. That information started coming out through other channels. A reporter from the Cascade County Register named Julie Brennan, who'd been covering education issues for 12 years, published an investigation 2 days after the crash that laid out a damning timeline. The bus that crashed had failed its annual safety inspection 8 months earlier due to brake system corrosion and hydraulic fluid leaks. The inspection report, filed with the State Department of Transportation, had given the district 90 days to complete repairs and re-inspect. According to Brennan's reporting, those repairs had never been completed. Instead, the district had applied for and received 3 separate deadline extensions, claiming budget constraints and parts availability issues. The bus had been operating on an expired safety certification for 5 months when it crashed. I read Brennan's article 3 times, my hands shaking with rage. The school district had known that bus was unsafe, had documented evidence of brake problems, had chosen to keep operating it anyway because fixing it would have cost money they didn't want to spend, and 25 people were dead because of that decision. I called Julie Brennan's number, listed at the bottom of the article, and got her voicemail. I left a message. "Miss Brennan, my name is Catherine Keller. My daughter Zoe was supposed to be on that bus. She refused to go at the last minute, which is the only reason she's alive. I'm a teacher in the district, and I've been in budget meetings where transportation maintenance was repeatedly deferred. I think there's more to this story than just one bus. I think the entire fleet might be unsafe. Please call me back." She called me within an hour. We met at a coffee shop in the next town over, far enough from Millbrook that we wouldn't be recognized. Julie Brennan was mid-30s, sharp-eyed, carrying a worn leather portfolio that suggested she'd been doing investigative journalism long enough to accumulate actual paper documents. "Mrs. Keller, thank you for reaching out," she said, sitting across from me in a corner booth. "I'm sorry about what happened to your daughter's class. I can't imagine what you're going through." "My daughter is alive because she had a nightmare and refused to get on that bus," I said flatly. "Everyone else in her class is dead because the school district decided maintenance was too expensive. That's not a tragedy. That's negligence. That's manslaughter." Julie pulled out a notebook. "Tell me about the budget meetings you mentioned. What exactly was being deferred?" I walked her through 3 years of union meetings I'd attended as the teacher's representative, meetings where the superintendent had presented budget proposals that consistently cut or delayed maintenance spending across multiple departments. Transportation had been hit particularly hard. In the 2019 budget, the allocation for bus maintenance had been reduced by 18%. In 2020, it had been cut another 12%. By 2021, the district was spending less than half what it had spent 5 years earlier on maintaining a fleet of 38 buses, many of which were over 15 years old. "Did anyone raise concerns about safety?" Julie asked, writing rapidly. "Every year," I said. "The transportation director, a man named Carl Whitmore, would present reports showing that we needed to retire older buses and invest in preventive maintenance. Every year, the superintendent and the school board would thank him for his input and then approve budgets that made his recommendations impossible to implement. Last year, Whitmore resigned, said he couldn't in good conscience oversee a fleet he knew was becoming dangerous." Julie looked up from her notes. "Did he document his concerns before he resigned?" "I don't know," I admitted. But I remember he gave a pretty impassioned speech at his final board meeting. Said that deferring maintenance wasn't saving money, it was just delaying inevitable costs until something catastrophic happened. The board president, a woman named Dorothy Vance, told him he was being alarmist and thanked him for his years of service. He left 2 weeks later. Do you know where Carl Whitmore is now? Julie asked. I heard he took a job with a private school in Seattle. Better pay, newer equipment, actually funded maintenance programs. But I don't have his contact information. Julie made another note. I'll find him. What about the superintendent? How has he responded to the crash? Dr. Kenneth Albright has been doing press conferences every day, I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Talking about the tragedy, the grief, the support for families. He hasn't said a word about the failed inspection, or the expired safety certification, or the budget cuts that made this crash inevitable, and Principal Hargrove told me not to talk to reporters, which I'm violating right now by being here. Why did you decide to talk to me anyway? Julie asked. Because my daughter is the only survivor of her entire 4th grade class, and the only reason she's alive is because she somehow knew that bus wasn't safe. I don't know if it was a nightmare or intuition or just random luck, but she refused to get on a bus that the school district knew had brake problems, and now 25 people are dead. If I stay quiet, if I let the district control the narrative, those deaths don't mean anything. They're just a tragedy, an accident, an unfortunate incident. But if I speak up, if I help you document what really happened, maybe something changes. Maybe the next school board actually funds maintenance. Maybe the next superintendent doesn't gamble with children's lives to save money on the budget. Julie reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Mrs. Keller, what you're doing takes courage. The district will not be happy when they find out you're talking to me. There may be professional consequences. Are you prepared for that? I'm a tenured teacher with 11 years in the district and a spotless record, I said. They can be as unhappy as they want. I'm not doing anything wrong by telling the truth about public budget meetings and documented safety failures. And if they try to retaliate against me for speaking up, that becomes another story about how the district prioritizes protecting itself over protecting students. Fair enough, Julie said, smiling slightly. One more question. You said your daughter had a nightmare about the bus crash before it happened. Has she said anything else about it? Any details that might be relevant? I thought about Zoe's words that morning, the terror in her voice when she'd screamed about falling and not being able to breathe. She said she could see it happening, said she saw the bus falling. I thought it was just a bad dream at the time, but now I don't know. Kids sometimes pick up on things adults miss. Maybe she'd noticed something wrong with the bus, some detail that registered in her subconscious as dangerous. Or maybe it really was just a nightmare that happened to come true. Either way, she's alive because I listened to her fear instead of dismissing it. The story Julie Brennan published 3 days later was devastating. She'd tracked down Carl Whitmore in Seattle, and he'd provided her with copies of every safety report and maintenance request he'd submitted during his final 5 years with Millbrook School District. The documents showed a pattern of increasingly urgent warnings about the deteriorating condition of the bus fleet, warnings that had been consistently ignored. Whitmore had specifically flagged the bus that crashed, noting in a report from 14 months earlier that it needed immediate brake system replacement and should be removed from service until repairs were completed. That report had been filed with both the superintendent and the school board. Nothing had been done. The article also included interviews with parents of children who died in the crash, parents who were now learning that the district had known the bus was unsafe and had operated it anyway. One mother, a woman named Patricia Dunn, whose 7-year-old son had been killed, gave a quote that would become iconic. They killed my baby to save money on brake pads. That's what this comes down to. They looked at the cost of fixing that bus and decided my son's life wasn't worth it. The public response was immediate and furious. Protests erupted outside the district administration building. Parents demanded the resignation of Superintendent Albright and the entire school board. The state education department announced an emergency investigation into the district's safety protocols, and the district's response was to close ranks and attack the messenger. 3 days after Julie's article published, I was called into Principal Hargrove's office for what was described as an informal meeting about recent events. When I arrived, I found not just Hargrove, but also the district's legal counsel, a thin man named Robert Feinstein who'd been representing the school board for 6 years, and the human resources director, a woman named Linda Cartwright. Mrs. Keller, Hargrove began, her voice cold and professional. We've become aware that you've been speaking to members of the media about internal district matters. Specifically, you provided information to reporter Julie Brennan that was used in a highly critical article about the district's transportation safety protocols. I provided information about public budget meetings and documented safety failures, I said, keeping my voice calm. Nothing I told Miss Brennan was confidential or proprietary. It was all part of the public record. You violated the district's media communication policy, Feinstein interjected. All media inquiries are supposed to be directed to the superintendent's office. By speaking to a reporter without authorization, you created liability exposure for the district and violated your employment contract. Show me where in my contract it says I can't discuss public information with journalists, I said. I'm a citizen with First Amendment rights. I'm also a union member with contractual protections against retaliation. This meeting feels like an attempt to intimidate me for speaking truth about how district budget decisions contributed to the deaths of 25 people. Hargrove's expression hardened. We're not intimidating you, Mrs. Keller. We're reminding you of your professional obligations. The district is facing multiple lawsuits from the families of crash victims. Every statement made to the media becomes potential evidence in those cases. When you tell reporters that we prioritize budgets over safety, you're making accusations that could cost the district millions of dollars in settlements. Good, I said, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. I hope those families sue for every penny the district has. I hope they take it to trial and force a jury to hear about how Superintendent Albright cut maintenance budgets year after year while Carl Whitmore begged for money to fix buses he knew were dangerous. I hope the truth comes out in court and everyone responsible for those deaths is held accountable. Linda Cartwright leaned forward. Mrs. Keller, I understand you're emotional about this situation. Your daughter was nearly on that bus. That would traumatize any parent. But you need to consider the bigger picture. The district serves 3,000 students. If we're bankrupted by lawsuits, those students lose their school. Teachers lose their jobs. The community suffers. Is that really what you want? What I want, I said slowly, is for no other parent to lose their child because this district decided brake repairs were too expensive. What I want is for the people who made those budget decisions to face consequences instead of hiding behind PR statements and legal threats. And what I want is for you to understand that intimidating me in this meeting is not going to make me stop talking about what I know. Feinstein pulled out a folder. Mrs. Keller, we're placing you on paid administrative leave pending an investigation into your conduct. You're not to return to school grounds or contact any students or staff while this investigation is ongoing. We'll be reviewing your communications with the media and determining whether disciplinary action is appropriate. You're suspending me for telling the truth, I said flatly. That's retaliation, and it's illegal. We're following standard protocol for investigating potential policy violations, Feinstein said smoothly. This isn't retaliation, this is due process. I stood up. We'll see what my union representative and my attorney have to say about that. And we'll see what Julie Brennan writes when she finds out you suspended a teacher for cooperating with her investigation into the district's role in killing 25 people. I walked out of that office with my hands shaking but my head clear. They'd made a mistake by trying to silence me. They'd turned this from a story about budget cuts and safety failures into a story about a cover-up and retaliation. And they'd done it on the record, in a meeting with 3 witnesses, creating documentation of their own misconduct. I called my union immediately. The teachers' union representative, a veteran English teacher named Gloria Mendez, listened to my account of the meeting and said a single word. Perfect. Perfect? I repeated. They suspended me for talking to a reporter? They suspended you for engaging in protected speech about matters of public concern, Gloria said. That's textbook retaliation. We're going to file a grievance, we're going to demand your immediate reinstatement, and we're going to make sure every teacher in this district knows that the administration tried to silence someone for telling the truth about safety failures that killed children. This is going to be a very bad week for Superintendent Albright. She was right. The union filed the grievance within 24 hours, and Julie Brennan published a follow-up article with the headline, District Suspends Teacher Who Spoke Out About Bus Safety Failures. The article framed my suspension as evidence that the district was more concerned with protecting itself from liability than with addressing the systemic failures that had caused the crash. Public opinion, already hostile toward the district, turned even more caustic. The state education department's investigation concluded 2 weeks after the crash, and its findings were damning. The investigation team, led by Deputy Education Commissioner Dr. Franklin Yu, documented 38 separate instances over the past 5 years where the district had deferred or declined recommended maintenance on school buses. 19 of the district's 38 buses were currently operating with expired or conditional safety certifications. The investigation also found that Superintendent Albright had been repeatedly warned by the transportation director about safety risks and had chosen to prioritize other budget items instead. Dr. Yu's report included a particularly devastating paragraph. The Millbrook School District's approach to transportation maintenance represents a systemic failure of leadership and a breach of the district's fundamental obligation to ensure student safety. The decision to operate buses with known safety defects, to ignore urgent warnings from qualified personnel, and to prioritize fiscal considerations over the lives of students demonstrates a level of negligence that cannot be tolerated in any educational institution. This office recommends immediate removal of current district leadership and comprehensive oversight of all district operations until such time as appropriate safety protocols can be established and verified. The report was released to the public on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, Superintendent Albright had resigned, along with 3 of the 5 school board members. The remaining 2 board members announced they would not seek re-election. The state appointed an interim superintendent and placed the district under emergency oversight. And the lawsuits began in earnest. 23 families filed wrongful death lawsuits against the district, seeking damages for negligence and willful misconduct. The lawsuits cited the state investigation findings, Carl Whitmore's safety reports, and the documented pattern of deferred maintenance as evidence that the district had knowingly endangered students. The families also sued the bus manufacturer and the company that had conducted the failed safety inspection, but the primary target was the school district and its leadership. I was deposed in several of the lawsuits, asked to testify about budget meetings and maintenance discussions, and the general culture of cost-cutting that had prevailed in the district. I told the truth, provided documentation from union files, and watched as attorneys built a case that the crash wasn't an accident, but the predictable result of years of negligent decision-making. The depositions were brutal. Defense attorneys tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind, someone who'd been suspended for policy violations and was now trying to get revenge by exaggerating the district's failures. But the documentary evidence was too strong. Carl Whitmore's reports, the state investigation findings, the failed inspection records, the budget documents showing systematic cuts to maintenance funding. The defense's strategy fell apart under the weight of proof that couldn't be explained away. The cases went to mediation rather than trial. The district's insurance carriers, facing potential judgments in the hundreds of millions of dollars, pushed for settlement. After 3 months of negotiation, the district agreed to pay a total of $98 million to the families of the victims, funded by insurance coverage and a special state appropriation that would be repaid through increased local property taxes over 20 years. The settlement also included provisions requiring the district to implement comprehensive safety protocols, retire all buses over 10 years old, establish a standing safety committee with parent representation, and submit to ongoing state oversight for a minimum of 5 years. It wasn't justice, not really. No amount of money could bring back the 25 people who died. But it was accountability, and it was change, and it was acknowledgement that what happened had been preventable. My suspension was lifted after the union grievance was upheld by an independent arbitrator who found that the district had violated my rights to engage in protected speech. I was offered my job back with full back pay and a formal letter of apology. I declined the job but accepted the back pay, using it to hire an attorney to help me establish a nonprofit organization focused on school transportation safety advocacy. I called it the Cascade Ridge Safety Foundation, named after the road where 25 people had died, because adults in positions of authority had made decisions that prioritized money over lives. Zoe went back to school eventually, but not to Millbrook Elementary. We transferred her to a private school in the next district, a place where she could start over without being known as the girl who survived when her entire class died. She saw a therapist, Dr. Jennifer Kwan, who specialized in childhood trauma and survivor's guilt. Dr. Kwan said Zoe was processing the crash as well as could be expected, that she understood on some level that her refusal to board the bus had saved her life, but she also felt guilty that her friends had died while she lived. It's developmentally normal, Dr. Kwan explained during one of our family sessions. Zoe can't fully grasp the randomness of survival at her age. She's looking for a reason why she lived and they died, and she's internalizing it as something she did or didn't do. Our job is to help her understand that she made a choice based on a feeling, and that choice happened to save her life, but she's not responsible for what happened to the other children. The adults who maintained that bus, who certified it as safe, who put it on the road despite knowing it had brake problems, those are the people responsible. Zoe asked me once, about 6 months after the crash, if I thought she'd really known the bus was going to crash, or if it had just been a bad dream. I don't know, sweetheart, I told her honestly. But I'm grateful every day that you trusted your fear enough to refuse to get on that bus. You saved your own life by listening to that feeling, and that's something to be proud of, not ashamed of. Richard and I testified before the state legislature when they held hearings on school transportation safety reform. We told Zoe's story, explained how close we'd come to losing her, and advocated for mandatory safety inspections with real enforcement mechanisms. The legislature passed the Cascade Ridge Student Safety Act 8 months after the crash, establishing new standards for school bus maintenance, requiring annual independent safety inspections, and creating penalties for districts that operated vehicles with expired certifications. It wouldn't bring back the children who died, but it might prevent the next tragedy. Julie Brennan won a state journalism award for her investigation into the crash and the district's safety failures. In her acceptance speech, she thanked me by name for having the courage to speak up when the district tried to silence the truth. Catherine Keller risked her career to tell the truth about how budget decisions kill children, she said. That's what journalism is supposed to do, hold power accountable. But we can't do it without sources who are willing to step forward even when there are consequences. Catherine stepped forward, and because she did, 23 families got justice and thousands of students are safer today. I watched the speech from home, sitting next to Zoe on the couch we'd bought after settling into our new house, away from Millbrook, away from the memories and the media attention and the constant reminders of the crash. "Mommy, are you famous?" Zoe asked. "No, sweetie," I said. "I'm just someone who told the truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet." 2 years after the crash, on the anniversary of the day 25 people died because a school district decided maintenance was too expensive, there was a memorial dedication in Millbrook. The families of the victims had worked with the town to create a permanent monument, a granite wall inscribed with the names of everyone who'd been on that bus, 23 children, ages 7 to 10, and 2 teachers who dedicated their lives to education. I attended with Richard and Zoe, standing at the back of the crowd as parents and siblings and friends placed flowers at the base of the wall. Zoe wanted to leave flowers too, roses for her former classmates, children whose empty desks she'd never sit next to again. "I miss them," she told me, holding my hand as we walked up to the monument. "I know it's not my fault they're gone, Dr. Kwan says so, but I still miss them, and I wish they were here." "I miss them too," I said. "And it's okay to miss them. It's okay to be sad that they're gone. What's not okay is pretending their deaths were just an accident, just bad luck, just something that happened for no reason. They died because adults made bad choices, and we have to remember that so we can make sure it doesn't happen again." We placed the roses at the memorial, and I read the names etched in granite, names I would never forget. Children who should have grown up to graduate high school and go to college and have families of their own. Children whose futures were stolen by negligence disguised as fiscal responsibility. The lawsuits had been settled, the leadership had been replaced, the laws had been changed. But the children were still dead, and no amount of accountability or reform or justice would ever change that fundamental truth. Zoe and I stood there for a long time, reading names, remembering faces, honoring lives that had been cut short by the preventable failure of a brake system that should have been repaired 8 months before it killed 25 people. Eventually, we walked back to our car, back to our new life, back to the future that Zoe had by refusing to board a bus she somehow knew was dangerous. I don't know if it was prescience or intuition or just random terror that happened to be correct. But I know that I listened to my daughter when she was afraid, and that listening saved her life. And I know that when the district tried to cover up its role in those deaths, I spoke up instead of staying silent, and that speaking helped bring about change that might save other children's lives. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's what I could do, and so I did it. The truth mattered more than my job security. Justice mattered more than convenience. And the lives of those 25 people mattered more than any institution's desire to protect its reputation. I taught middle school math for 11 years before the crash. Afterward, I became something different, an advocate, an activist, someone who understood that silence in the face of preventable tragedy is its own form of complicity. The Cascade Ridge Safety Foundation grew into a regional organization working with school districts across 3 states to implement proper maintenance protocols and safety oversight. We helped pass legislation, trained administrators, audited bus fleets, and shared Zoe's story whenever it might make a difference. 4 years after the crash, I received a letter from Patricia Dunn, the mother who'd given that devastating quote about her son's life not being worth the cost of brake pads. She wrote, "Dear Catherine, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done to honor our children's memories and to prevent other families from experiencing what we went through. When I learned that you'd been suspended for speaking out, I was furious on your behalf. When I learned that you'd turned that retaliation into a nonprofit dedicated to safety reform, I was inspired. My son Thomas is gone, and nothing will ever fill that void. But knowing that his death and the deaths of his classmates led to real change, that it meant something beyond grief and loss, that helps. It doesn't fix anything, but it helps. You gave us that. You refused to let their deaths be swept under bureaucratic excuses and insurance settlements. You demanded accountability and you got it. Thank you. I will be forever grateful that you had the courage to speak when the district wanted everyone to stay silent. Sincerely, Patricia." I kept that letter in my desk drawer and read it whenever I felt tired or discouraged or wondered if any of this advocacy work actually mattered. It mattered to Patricia. It mattered to the other families. It mattered to the thousands of students who rode safer buses because of the reforms we'd fought for. And it mattered to Zoe, who was growing up knowing that her survival had meaning beyond random chance, that the nightmare that had saved her life had also helped prevent future tragedies. On the 5th anniversary of the crash, Julie Brennan published a retrospective piece examining what had changed in the years since 25 people died on Cascade Ridge Road. The statistics were encouraging. School bus safety violations had decreased by 63% statewide. Maintenance funding had increased by 41% on average. The number of buses operating with expired certifications had dropped to nearly zero. But the article also noted that the changes had only happened because of public pressure following a tragedy, because of lawsuits and investigations and advocates who refused to let the story fade. Systemic change shouldn't require dead children, Julie wrote in her conclusion. But in this case, it did. The Cascade Ridge crash exposed failures that had existed for years, but were only addressed after 25 people paid the ultimate price. The question now is whether we can maintain these reforms without the emotional impetus of fresh tragedy, or whether we'll gradually slip back into the cost-cutting mindset that made the crash inevitable. The answer to that question will determine whether those 25 lives lost on Cascade Ridge Road truly mattered, or whether they become just another cautionary tale that's eventually forgotten. I read that article and thought about my daughter, about the morning she locked herself in the bathroom and refused to board a bus that would have killed her, about the choice I made to listen to her fear instead of dismissing it as childish anxiety. I thought about the other parents, the ones who'd said goodbye to their children that morning and never saw them alive again, parents who trusted that the school district would keep their kids safe and were betrayed by that trust. And I thought about what I'd learned over 5 years of fighting for accountability and reform. That institutions will always protect themselves unless forced to do otherwise. That speaking truth to power has consequences, but silence has worse ones. And that the only way to honor preventable deaths is to prevent the next ones. Zoe is 13 now, thriving in middle school, still seeing Dr. Kwan occasionally when the anniversary of the crash brings back difficult memories. She knows what happened to her classmates, knows that she survived because she trusted a feeling she couldn't explain, knows that her mother risked her career to make sure those deaths weren't covered up or forgotten. "Do you think they'd be proud of you?" she asked me recently. "Your old students, the ones who died. Do you think they'd be happy about what you did?" "I think," I said carefully, "that if they could see how many children are safer now because of the changes that came from their deaths, they'd want that to continue. I think they'd want us to keep fighting to make sure no other class loses an entire generation of friends because adults chose money over safety. And I think they'd want you to know that surviving isn't something to feel guilty about. It's something to honor by living fully and speaking truth and never accepting that preventable tragedies are just accidents we have to accept." She nodded, processing that in the way teenagers do, half understanding and half still figuring it out. "I'm glad you didn't make me get on that bus," she said finally. "Even though I didn't know why I was scared, I'm glad you listened." "I'm glad I listened too," I said, "and I'm sorry I ever considered not listening, even for a moment." The memorial wall in Millbrook has become a place where people leave flowers year-round now, not just on the anniversary. It's become a symbol of both loss and accountability, a reminder that the 25 people whose names are etched in that granite died because of choices that could have been different. The Cascade Ridge Safety Foundation continues its work, auditing school bus fleets, training administrators, advocating for maintenance funding, and sharing Zoe's story whenever it might make a difference. We've expanded into other areas of school safety, building maintenance, playground equipment, food service protocols, because the same mindset that led to the bus crash exists everywhere. Budgets are tight and administrators prioritize appearances over investment. My career changed the day I decided to talk to Julie Brennan. I stopped being a middle school math teacher and became someone who fights institutional failure by refusing to stay silent when silence is easier. It's harder work, emotionally exhausting and sometimes thankless, but it's work that matters in ways that teaching algebra never quite did. Because I know what happens when people trust institutions to protect children, and those institutions choose budgets over safety instead. I've seen the granite wall with 25 names. I've met the families who wake up every day without their children. I've held my own daughter close and known that the only difference between her survival and their loss was a nightmare I could have dismissed but chose to honor instead. And I've learned that the most important thing any of us can do is tell the truth, even when there are consequences, even when it's uncomfortable, even when institutions with lawyers and PR teams try to silence us. Because silence protects the people who made the bad choices. Truth protects the people who might be next. The bus that crashed has been preserved as evidence, will probably be preserved forever as a teaching tool for investigators and safety inspectors. I saw it once, in a state police evidence facility, a crumpled yellow wreck that used to carry children to school and field trips and home again. Looking at it, I thought about all the moments that led to its final journey off Cascade Ridge Road. The budget meetings where maintenance was deferred, the inspection that failed it 8 months before the crash, the extensions granted despite safety concerns, the decision to keep operating it anyway because new buses were expensive, and surely the old ones could last just a little longer. 25 people died because someone decided to take that gamble. And if my daughter hadn't locked herself in a bathroom and refused to get on that bus, if I hadn't listened to her fear, she would have been one of them. I think about that every single day, and it's why I can't stop fighting for the reforms that make tragedies like this less likely. It's why I show up to legislative hearings and school board meetings and safety conferences. It's why I tell Zoe's story over and over, even though reliving that morning never gets easier. Because somewhere right now, there's probably another school district deferring maintenance to save money. Another bus with failing brakes still carrying children. Another tragedy waiting to happen because adults are gambling with lives they're supposed to protect. And maybe, if enough people hear this story, if enough people understand what happened on Cascade Ridge Road and why it happened, the next district will make a different choice. The next budget will prioritize safety over savings. The next child who has a nightmare about a bus will be listened to instead of dismissed. That's the only justice I can offer the 25 people whose names are etched in granite in Millbrook. That's the only way their deaths mean anything beyond grief and loss. And it's why I'll keep telling this story for as long as anyone will listen. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.